Welcome to this episode of the Legal Paige podcast. Wedding planners, I'm so excited to bring you into this episode. There's so many legal sticky situations that you can run into as a planner. Let me first just tell you a story about this one gal who had a bride bring her decor to use on the day of the wedding, but then some of the decor got thrown out after. Some of the decor she really wanted back. And because no one told the planner to save that decor, now the bride was attempting to get massive compensation and was blaming everything on the planner. So what a legal nightmare, right? What would you do in this situation? What type of clauses did you need to have in your contract to protect you from this from occurring so you have some leg to stand on? I am going to go over all of this in today's episode, as well as other contract no-nos and so much more. I am also extremely overjoyed to have a wedding planner pro, Brandee Gaar, on the podcast today. This is going to be such a great episode for planners. Let me just tell you a little bit about Brandee. So Brandee Gaar is a luxury event planner, thought leader, educational speaker, and host of the She Who Dares podcast. As a lifelong lover of all things events, Brandee spent 7 years as a corporate event planner with the prestigious Gaylord Hotels before opening her event event consulting firm. Blush by Brandee Gaar and 11 Events by Blush have quickly become known for their over-the-top events and high-touch standard of customer service. Brandee is passionate about teaching new and aspiring entrepreneurs her exact strategies in growing two six-figure businesses. She also provides expert tools for those who are ready to make their side hustle into a full-time passion. Her goal is to help new businesses beat the statistics by starting with a success-minded focus. And listeners, before we dive into things, the Legal Paige shop has the perfect template contract for wedding planners. As a wedding industry professional myself, I know exactly what needs to be in your client contracts. I've worked with experts in the field like Brandee and Tyler Spire and many more. So with this wedding planning contract, you'll be covered for any situation, including delays in communication or ghosting, any additional hours that would be invoiced at your hourly rate beyond the scope of services that you agreed to within your package. What all of your duties are as a coordinator are explained and signed off on, including what you will not be doing. Your client's responsibilities, such as paying their own vendors and vendor cancellations, time limits on modifications and changes to the overall wedding theme, your travel expenses, use of wedding images from the photographer, and literally so much more. This contract was reviewed, like I said, by 3 professional wedding planners. It includes all the things you definitely need. So head over to thelegalpage.com/wedding planning and add this contract to your legal toolkit. All right, let's get into this episode, Legal Pagers. You're listening to the Legal Paige podcast, where we chat about life and business with a legal twist. I'm Paige, attorney and photographer helping online businesses and creatives tackle their business dreams without breaking out in hives. No more legal mumbo jumbo. This podcast features simple, bite-sized advice that'll have you legally legit in no time. Are you ready? Let's get started. As a reminder, before we get into this episode, I am legally obligated to give my disclaimer. I am an attorney, but I am not your attorney. All legal information I talk about in this episode is intended for the masses and a large variety of different businesses. Please seek out another attorney in your city and home state if you need specific legal advice related to your unique business. Okay, let's get back to it. Friends, thanks again for listening to today's podcast. Brandee is here with me to talk about the wedding planning industry, some contract no-nos, and how to best legally protect your business. Brandee, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Paige.
Brandee, I know you very, very well. We're good friends, but I would love for you to give our listeners a little insight into kind of what you do, your background, and how you coach other wedding planners and wedding industry pros as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a wedding planner in Orlando, Florida, and I own one of the largest wedding planning firms here in Central Florida. And next month, or this summer, I guess, we have been in business for 15 years, which feels incredible and insane. And we have a team of 6, and we do corporate and weddings. And so I absolutely love this industry so much. And about 2.5 years ago, I actually started teaching other wedding professionals how to scale a profitable business that they love. Because I feel like in our industry, in this industry, wedding professionals were burned out and overwhelmed as this badge of honor. Like the more stressed and tired you are, you must be the most successful person in the room. And I was like, no, I don't want to be any part of that. Like I want to build a business that gives me the freedom to be able to be creative and, have a life and enjoy my family as well and have a comfortable lifestyle. So that's what I built. And now that's what I teach other wedding professionals to build, is how to kind of get through that messy middle of going from solo overwhelmed business owner to confident CEO, knowing your numbers and understanding how to strategically build a team and how to really scale. And so I started the Wedding Pro CEO podcast as well about 2 years ago. And the whole purpose of that podcast and our Wedding Pro CEO community is to help wedding professionals build a profitable business they love. So I love being involved with people and like kind of meeting them in that place where they're like, Brandee, I haven't slept. I'm exhausted. And yet somehow like I feel like I should be thankful because I'm so busy, but like I hate this. And I'm like, yes, like this is where I want to meet you because there is another side to this. We just have to get over the hill. So yeah.
That's awesome. I literally love the business that you created and how you help people. You have a wealth of experience and information to dole out to people who are just starting out or who are a few years into business, who are wanting to grow their teams. I know you and I have talked about that so many times. We could probably go on and on and on about building teams and what that looks like because we both have pretty significant teams. But this episode in particular, I want to just like pick your brain about the wedding planning industry in particular, because I feel like you've seen it for much longer than other planners have. When did you first start? Like, what is the first year you started doing wedding planning?
Yeah, June 15th of 2007. And I remember it so vividly because it was my last day at my corporate job, which I loved. I didn't run from a corporate job I hated. I just wanted something different. And so it was June 15th of 2007. And that's the same day I filed my business license.
Well, yeah, easy to remember, right? You can just go pull up your business license document. But
right.
You'll never forget that first day you started. I'll never forget mine either. It was August 27th, 2016. So it's so funny. Anyway, I am really interested in what has changed. It's like you've gone through 2007. You've gone through the recession. You've gone through the wedding industry picking back up. And then you went through the past horrendous couple of years with the wedding industry picking back up. But then COVID happened. And now it's like booming because everything is happening in 2022, 2023, and probably 2024 as well. So I just want to talk about contractual things, especially when it comes to how things have evolved over the years. Let's start with inflation, because I think this is a big one that you can give a lot of insight into that other planners wouldn't be able to because they haven't been in it since 2007. You've seen the ebbs and flows and changes of, vendor pricing, venue pricing, planning pricing, travel pricing, all of that. I feel like we've just started to recover from the pandemic hitting us, in the face 2 years ago in the wedding and event industry. And now we're dealing with massive spikes in inflation. So what are you seeing popping up, or even questions and issues that have come about when it comes to inflation, especially in 2022?
Yeah, I think for planners, one of the blessings is that we really don't have a product, right? So there's not, thankfully, our costs are fairly well managed based on really just gas. Like we're driving to different places. Most of us do not have products. We just have a service. However, if you are paying yourself in your business, which you should be doing, your personal costs are likely really, really growing. And so considering whether you're still making enough from your business to support the existing lifestyle you have. So as a planner directly, I would say that unless you're doing destination weddings, which a lot of you are, but unless you're doing destination weddings, you really don't have a ton of hard costs that are going up in cost necessarily. But I would look at how much you're paying yourself and if you can give yourself an increase to cover your personal expenses. If you are doing destination weddings, that's a whole different ballgame. And I want to get into that topic specifically. But for those of us who aren't, let's just stay there for a second. The other thing that I think that is really, really affecting us as planners is that our partners are being hit with these product costs.
Mm-hmm.
And, florists have actually been dealing with it for the entire pandemic because when things were shut down before we even had inflation as an issue, they just couldn't get flowers. It was whether things could get here. And if they could get them, it was 5 times the price. And so dealing with a lot of that with our partners. But we also have, photographers that are dealing with rising labor costs or even film costs or processing. And we've got DJs that are dealing with equipment costs and things like that, stationers, paper costs. So working with your vendors to understand what they're going through and what their costs are going to look like. I think for planners, the biggest struggle we have is that a lot of our budgets for our clients were written several months ago before inflation was a thing. And so now, if contracts haven't been signed with these vendors, of course they're raising their prices because they've got to cover, what their new costs are. And so now budgets aren't necessarily stretching as far as we thought that they would.
So what would happen if, say, like a vendor that's already booked with your client has like a set amount? I see this, like you said, with florists or caterers or like hair and makeup artists as well, where they have lots of like tangible goods that they need to perform their services. Food prices have obviously exponentially increased as well as florals. So what happens though if, say, they quoted you and booked at a certain amount 6 months ago, but now there's no way they can even offer it for that price? Have you ran into that? Because I know that's been popping up a lot in the community, our TLP community, where they're like, there's no way I can do this for this price, because at the time of contracting, we both weren't aware of what wholesale prices were going to look like.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to each individual's contract. And as a planner, this is why we want to be paying very close attention to what our vendor contracts say on behalf of our clients and making sure that our clients understand that. So for instance, most hotels in my market have a clause that says that menu pricing will be guaranteed 6 months before the event. So you could sign a contract with a hotel, a venue, and, maybe it's 10, 12, 14 months before the event. But if there's that clause that says that the contract pricing isn't guaranteed until 6 months before the event, you do a budget based on old pricing, inflation hits, and now your client is responsible for paying the new pricing. That's going to come back on you as a planner because you should have caught that clause. So these are the things that we're going to want to look for. We actually require our hotels, if we're going to let our clients sign it, we ask that the menu pricing is guaranteed at the time of signature. And that's a lot of times a negotiation that you can use with your hotel partners or your venue partners, that they will agree to that. 9 times out of 10 is what we've seen, that they will agree to that. If they're not going to agree to that, that's just something you need to make your clients very aware of. Like, hey, your menu pricing isn't locked in until 6 months before. And as we all know, the catering is about 50% of an overall wedding cost. So we're not talking about a small amount here. Like, it could be a significant amount, especially with inflation. With other vendors like florists, DJs, photographers, things like that, I don't see as often that they've got these inflation clauses in there. And I'd love to know what your thoughts are on that, Paige, specifically for maybe like our florists, our stationers that have such high product costs. I would wonder if they can guarantee pricing at a later date. I think that that's something they could certainly add in. But as of right now, in my market, we don't see that a lot with our vendors. So as a planner, unless my vendor had an out in their contract allowing them to raise the prices, I would have to advocate on behalf of my client, really per the contract.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think this is a really, really good thing to dive into in terms of like a company's right to adjust pricing clause, Brandee. That's what we call it here at the Legal Page. And it's really, really interesting because obviously you advocate on behalf of your clients most of the time. as planners and you're looking very, very like deeply at some of their vendor contracts and looking for these clauses and a way out, we have actually just started adding these in. So with like legal page template contracts, we see them as living documents. And when things like this come up, we have to protect our vendors. We have to protect, the business owners that are buying contracts from us. We're oftentimes not necessarily advocating for clients. And so this dichotomy is fun to talk about with you because we've added this clause in. And it does allow people an out. But here's the thing, they didn't know they needed it until now. It's just like COVID. Like we didn't know we needed this very specific language in our force majeure clause or cancellation rescheduling clauses. And so this clause, I would say if you have contracts that are existing 3+ months like prior to today's date or 6+ months prior to today's date, you probably aren't going to see this clause in too many contracts. As Brandee said, like big hotels and things along those lines and catering companies, like they know they've had this like occur. They've gone through the ebbs and flows of changes with inflation and pricing from year to year. And so they probably have some type of language. And Brandee's saying like she's used to seeing that and she's used to that being a very negotiated clause in the contract. And this is where you as a wedding planner can really like work for your clients. And they're going to love that you do this service for them. You take on this burden, it's off their shoulders, and they can kind of lock in prices before. But in terms of, smaller businesses, I would say that can't really offset those costs too much. Like, smaller, like florist companies, hair and makeup industry companies, like you said, calligraphers or stationers that are doing products like so close to the event. We have this type of clause where it's very similar to what Brandee says. Usually 6 months is a little bit long, Brandee, for I think a lot of smaller businesses. We would say somewhere between 30 to 60 days, right? When they're like ordering wholesale flowers or they're sending that final invoice. And then the clients would have the right to look at that final invoice. The company has the right to adjust pricing based upon what, the wholesale goods are at that time. And then upon the final invoice, then the clients could negotiate and like change things that they had originally agreed to. So that is how we would present it on behalf of the business owners. Like that's your best way of ensuring that you're protecting those costs. But Brandee, I love that you're saying, from a flip side, if I had that contract, like maybe we negotiate it where it's not 30 days prior. Maybe you can negotiate it so it's 120 days prior or 90 days prior, just to give your clients a little more wiggle room where if prices do go up, say, let's just stick with florals because especially with catering, it's like you want to lock that in with catering, right? Because like Brandee said, it's such a huge percentage of your overall wedding budget. But for florals, like I would say, Brandee, and tell me if I'm wrong here, I would say there's a little more wiggle room. Like clients can kind of take some and give some and move things around a little bit. So for florists in particular, I would say this clause is so important to you to have in there because like your costs at the end of the day really contribute to, the final invoice price. And I think, 30 days is probably best for people that are ordering things the month of the event and they're sending that final invoice at that time. So notice is key for this clause, you guys. Just to wrap this up, notice, legally speaking, what is the time frame of the notice that they have to give, the clients who have signed the contract regarding any changes to pricing. And then as well as like the option for your clients to adjust their overall package if they do need to stay within budget. Brandee, do you have anything in addition to that?
The only thing I would say to that is, know that your planner partners, hopefully I should say, but that your planner partners are really in a unique position that we have to advocate on behalf of our clients per whatever's in the contract. So if you didn't already have this clause, of course, we would try to work with you as much as possible, but understand that planners aren't out to get you, but that's our job, is to advocate for our clients on behalf of what was in your contract when we signed it. But I agree with Paige. If you had this clause in your contract, I personally would ask for 60 days for a smaller business, mainly just because at 30 days, I need my client to be focused on like their seating chart and their RSVPs. Like I don't need them renegotiating flowers at that point. I need them focused. So I would probably ask for 60 days. And at 60 days, and this is just me, I would be negotiating this, but I would be saying, you could at least have an idea of what percentage inflation's going up at this point, right? Like, do you need to add 15%? What are we looking at here? And so, but I love the idea of being able to give your client the option to renegotiate. But guys, I can't stress, Paige said it, but like you have to have this clause in your contract if you produce a good, because we have no flipping idea what pricing is doing right now for the next however many years. It's going all over the place. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, this clause is so important. And I think you nailed it, and we can move on from this topic. I feel like everyone's like, hey, we got it. No, but it's really interesting. I think both of our takes, and then the 60 days, I'm thinking 30, but 60 makes a lot more sense. And then even like a planner could try to negotiate it to be like 90 or 120, where you're like really advocating on behalf of your client. But then business owners are also trying to protect themselves and like foresee pricing. I would say, 60 days. Within 2 months, you're going to know like, what are my prices, my wholesale prices? Like I can get this final invoice figured out. Taking a quick break in this episode to share about our wedding planning contract here at the Legal Page. As a wedding coordinator, you need to be covered for any potential situation that could come up from the time you book your clients through the entirety of the planning process and day of coordination. Included is a communication clause that will ensure you are contacted only during your office hours, so no late night texts with clients. What happens if your clients ghost you during the planning process? Your day of hours of coverage that are set in stone, and that any additional hours will be invoiced at your hourly rate. Or if you take a commission percentage of the total amount of the package and all of the vendors involved. All of your duties as a coordinator are explained and signed off on, including what you will not be doing as a coordinator. Your client's responsibilities, such as paying their own vendors and vendor cancellations, and so much more. This contract was reviewed by 3 professional wedding planners and is incredibly comprehensive. Not to mention, you get all future updates that we ever make here at the Legal Page, included complimentary with your purchase. So head to thelegalpage.com/wedding planning. Again, that's thelegalpage.com/wedding planning, all lowercase, and add this contract to your legal toolkit today. Okay, Brandee, so switching gears here just a titch to destination planning, because it's so different when you're kind of working in the States, the continental states, and it's a little bit, I would say, more structured in terms of dealing with inflation, a little more predictable. But with destination planning, you're dealing with flights, you're dealing with massive changes in, actual lodging prices, right? And everything that comes along with that as well. Car rentals, all of those things. So can you give us some insight into what you've experienced with massive changes with inflation for destination weddings in particular?
Yeah, I think, this is one that I see a lot come up with wedding planners, is that they'll put a travel fee in their contract for destination weddings versus listing out the things the client is responsible for paying for. And we've always listed it out. Honestly, it wasn't necessarily to protect us from inflation in the beginning, but now it's worked in our favor. But instead of saying, we have a $1,000 travel fee. Well, now you're eating that inflation cost because you charge them $1,000, whether your flight is $200 or $900. And so instead, one of the things I would encourage you to think about is just listing out, you will require 2, flights on a major airline, whatever that looks like, exactly what it is. You're going to require 3 room nights, for 2 hotel rooms at the host hotel. You're going to require a $75 per diem charge per planner. Whatever that looks like, I really want you to consider listing out those items instead of just putting in a flat fee based on what it is today, because gas is going to go up, car rentals are going up, flights are going up. So instead, you can just list those out, and then you can work with the client to decide when you're going to book those. Once they're booked, they're non-refundable. So if the client wants to wait until 60 days before the wedding to book your flights, no problem, but you might be paying a higher cost, right? But once your travel is booked, it's non-refundable. And making sure that that's also said in your contract is that once our travel is booked, it's non-refundable, whether the wedding cancels or not.
I love all of this, you guys. Like, check, check, check. If you're a planner, have this type of travel clause in your contract. This is a huge thing we see as well, Brandee, not only for wedding planners, but for like adventure elopement photographers or the destination photographers or videographers as well, where they try to make their package all inclusive and they have a flat fee, and then it comes back to bite them in the butt a little bit when they didn't necessarily think about forecasting changes with flights and hotels and car rentals and those type of things, and per diems as well. If you are, I think wedding planners are in this other bubble that's really interesting, where I think you can totally get away with just making it, you have to do this, these 2 flights on a major commercial airline, this many hotel rooms, per diems. I think you can lock that in with your clients and they'd understand the differences. And you're like communicating and working with your clients so much that you have that, really companion, type of like camaraderie experience with your clients and relationship with them, where you can be like, I wouldn't suggest waiting until 60 days. And you're talking with them for the 12 months prior to the event. But I think for other vendors that are doing destination weddings, not just planners, sometimes you do want to keep it all inclusive. But what Brandee and I are saying here is we've experienced so many hiccups with wedding pros that we talk with, mentor, communicate with, and you have to make that fee so much higher than you think you do. So if you have a flat fee, just offset your costs a little bit, thinking, okay, maybe I'm making a little bit more this year with a flat fee, but next year, I'm not going to be making as much if I keep that flat fee. You've really got to figure out what's going to work for you. But I think Brandee's way of doing things makes the most sense, and having that laid out in your contract.
Just made it easier for us.
All right. So interesting. So interesting. But let's talk about all kinds of legal sticky situations that have occurred in your career and how to best protect your wedding planning business from them. Because as we talked about at the beginning, Brandee, you just have a lot of years of experience on a lot of newer planners that are coming into the industry. So what are your recommendations just for like a couple clauses off the top of your head that you absolutely need to have in wedding planning contracts, and that you just really didn't have at the beginning of your career, and now it's really saved you? I know we just talked about the travel fee clause and like a right to adjust pricing clause, looking at it in terms of other vendor contracts, but particularly for planning contracts, what other ones would you suggest people put in?
Yeah, so the rescheduling clause, which we actually got from the legal page at the beginning of COVID, that one that has saved our booty so many times, because we thought in that first wave of reschedules, that was going to be all the reschedules, right? And then we got like second wave, third wave, and I don't even know what wave we're on now. So to me, I feel like that was a huge one, especially for planners. And because there's so much work that goes into a rescheduling of a wedding, and it falls on us. And so that has been really huge. And I would encourage you, if you don't have a rescheduling fee or a cancellation reschedule fee in your contract, to go get that now and get it in your contract. So that would be one that I would say. And then another one that I would say, Paige, is actually one that you're creating, because we talked about it on my podcast. So this is one that I've wished we would have had. So any planners that are out there that are listening, and actually, I think this goes for any vendor really, but is the client ghosting clause. And I know that you guys have it listed differently in the client communication, but basically for us, when a client stops communicating with us and just kind of like goes AWOL, we have no idea what's going on. We can't continue to do our job. We're not able to plan. We're not able to communicate with vendors. People are wondering, what's the final count? What are we doing about linens? Where's our payments? And that's all falling on us. It's not only creating more work for us, but it's also putting us at a standstill, unable to execute the contract we are hired for. And so we talked about that on my podcast, and we're getting that in our contract immediately, because it really has been a super challenge, especially lately, with clients that just like literally just stop talking to you for a month or 2 months because they have maybe personal things going on, or they might be thinking about canceling their wedding, but they're not sure. So they just ghost you and don't tell you what's going on. And then you can't execute your contract. So that's a clause that we are really excited about getting into our contract immediately.
Yeah, I love that. So Brandee and I were chatting about this in terms of what we do with like existing wedding planning contracts. And so if you have a legal page wedding planning contract, it's a living document. You guys know you'll get free future updates. So we're going to update the communication clause. It's essentially going to say like what happens in the event of like complete non-communication, and then it would equal an automatic breach and termination by client within a certain period of time. But of course, you as the planner have to give, enough notices that you have those documented, whereby you can just kind of unilaterally cancel the contract because you can't complete your services. And I think clients are getting really smart about ghosting, and they realize that like their vendor or their planner or their venue or whatever is still on the hook for this contract. And then if they wait a certain period of time, that they might be able to just like terminate, not have to pay the final invoice. And then they, are only losing out on a certain amount of money, or then they like think about arguing for refunds. It's just a hot mess express. And I don't know why, but clients have like they've been gaining a lot of power in terms of ghosting. And so we want to push back on that a little bit and protect yourself and your business, especially with planners, because you're so integral in the pre-wedding and event process that just you can't move. Like you can't even take a step forward if your client's ghosting you.
Well, right. And the challenge with that is that most planners are going to have some sort of a schedule to their planning, right? Like you've got some sort of a phased-based planning, or you know what's going to happen in which month. And we just recently came across this with a client who literally ghosted for months, and we had no recourse. And by the time she decided to show back up, we were in busy season. All of our vendors that we would normally go to were booked, and we're like, yeah, good luck getting somebody on that date. And we were scrambling. So it created so much work for us. We didn't have the capacity to handle the workload, which we just ended up having to work longer days, right, to get it done. But if I would have had this clause in there, then months before when she was ghosting us, we could have let her know that she was in breach of contract, that if she's not providing us with the communication to do our job, we're not going to be able to move forward. And so that would have been able to give us a leg to stand on to have more of that power back. Whereas with the way our contract is currently written, we had no power. We had no recourse. We had to show up at the wedding. We had to book the vendors. So it was just on her timeline, which was very frustrating.
Correct. And laying that type of foundation at the beginning within your contract, like Brandee said, always gives you just more power. And honestly, I think it empowers you to be able to go back to a clause and be like, well, this is what the policy states. And like, you agreed to this. And communication is key in us being able to work together, and it's not happening. So yeah, you guys, that clause is really important, as well as rescheduling clause, as well as the travel fee clause that we talked about. Of course, there's all kinds of other clauses as well. I'm just going to mention a few here, Brandee, that I'm sure you know about and other planners know about. But if you don't have it in your planning contract, make sure you put it in there. Changes to project scope, what that looks like. I think a lot of planners that are just starting out deal with this, where they don't realize that clients want to book your lowest package, but then the scope increases and increases and increases, and they kind of tend to walk all over you if you don't have that type of clause in your contract. So that's really important, as well as what is the liability surrounding third-party vendors, right? Are you looking at contracts, but you're probably not signing them on behalf of your clients? Some planners do take on that responsibility and role, but that's a lot of risk and liability you're putting on your business. So third-party vendor liability clauses are important because it explains that you'll work with the third-party vendors, like you'll help them figure out which ones are best for their wedding and event, but at the end of the day, they're signing the contract. And they're the ones that are agreeing to the roles and responsibilities under that contract. So that's really important as well. Those are just a couple, of course, like fee and retainer. Just quickly, I want to touch on this. You guys, if you go back to the Legal Page podcast episode surrounding flat fee retainers, and then I also talk about in planning purposes. So for planner contracts, for adventure elopement photography contracts where they have this like quasi-planner aspect to their services, a lot of times it's really good. And Brandee, push back on me here when it comes to like commission pricing and things along those lines, because I think you can do both. But for planners in particular, what you will get into some hot water with reschedulings and cancellations if you haven't been paid adequately through like installment payments or through different phases of the project, if like they just cancel on you. And so for planners, I do think it's really important to like have that base reservation fee and then some installment payments throughout the planning process instead of just like the 25% to book and then 75% is due after the wedding, because I think that was a lot of what was in our contracts pre-COVID as planners. And we learned a big lesson post-COVID where we needed to switch that up. So we were getting paid for our work performed up to the date of a rescheduling or cancellation. That's the only other clause I wanted to touch on. Brandee, do you have any like further tips on that?
I mean, that one, guys, that's like you must, as a planner, have installment payments. Thankfully, my husband and I were at a conference very early on in our business, and we heard someone talk about this and why. And we were like, immediately we went and changed it. I think we were maybe 3 years into our business, 4 years. And at the time, we were doing the same thing. We were doing the 30% and then 70%. And you're not getting paid for the work done. And good luck if a client cancels, 5 days before their wedding, 10 days before their wedding. Good luck collecting payment. It's not going to happen. So you really need to think about, how do you plan your weddings? We do phase-based planning. So we do, a big chunk right up front, and then we move into phase 2, and then we move into phase 3. And really that final payment is simply to pay us for the execution of the actual wedding day. So if we've collected the first 2 payments, we've been paid for work done at that point. And that's really, really important, because so often weddings, you would be shocked if you're a new planner, you'd be shocked at how many of your weddings cancel. It's always like, people are like, you never had a wedding cancel? I'm like, oh my, yes. We have multiple weddings cancel a year, and for various reasons, but it happens, and you need to protect yourself, because once a client cancels, if you have not collected payment, I mean, outside of going to court, which who wants to do that? You're not going to collect the money. They're not going to shell out payment to you.
Yeah. And again, people are like, oh, I can go to court. And I'm like, cool, but they're just going to have a judgment against them. And then it's going to be outstanding. And then you have to go to collections. And it's just like this big hot mess when you could have like collected payment throughout the process. So I love that we touched on that. So the last thing I want to ask you, Brandee, is the difference here for newer, let's talk to the newer wedding planners listening, or people who are just getting started. There's a big difference between full service planning and day of services for like, that you would offer your clients. Many planners, I think, start with day of services because it's hard to not have, client testimonials, to not have like anything in your portfolio to showcase to new clients, whereby they would want to book you for full service planning for months in advance. So sometimes you're just trying to build that clientele and word of mouth. They're doing really, really good day of services. But I think what most planners get into hot water with is they either didn't have a contract, or it was kind of like a handshake deal on what they're going to do. And they didn't think about things that could happen day of, like what happens if things get damaged, or what's the client's responsibility to bring to the event for day of planning versus you picking up like the week before, the day before. I mean, I don't know what day of actually involves. I assumed it would just be day of, but I've heard there's like the week before. And then, clients coming back to say certain elements weren't used or weren't done right, or you didn't communicate with vendors very well. But it's hard. It's hard with day of services to offer that as a planner, because you're not so integral in the planning process, and you're kind of just like taking off that burden for your brides or, your spouse's day of the wedding. So they don't have to worry about any of that. But what would you say to people who are just getting started? They're having like a day of planning service option, and they're getting their clients to sign a contract. What do they need to expect from that moment going forward?
Yeah. So there's a lot to this answer, but the first thing I would say is day of coordination is kind of this like magical creature that doesn't actually exist. So a lot of us call our service day of coordination, but then it says we get involved in your wedding 6 weeks before. And it's like, well, then why is it called day of coordination? So the very first thing I'd say is if you're still using the term day of coordination, I want you to be really, really thoughtful about what you're actually providing. If you are showing up on the day of the wedding and your job is just to come put things out and help their schedule run on time, great, then call it day of coordination. But understand that you're going to need to let your clients know that you've had no prior communication with their vendors. So if they show up with the wrong cake or they show up at the wrong time, you didn't provide that information to them. So you're really just kind of like this human that's there to pick stuff up and put stuff down. And that's okay if that's what you're providing, but it's very rare that a coordinator is actually providing that. Most of us are providing event management service, which is starting 4, 6, or 8 weeks before the wedding. That's more typical of what we're seeing. And we want to make sure that we're calling it what it is, which is event management. You're going to step in and you're going to execute all the final details. So you're going to reach out to their vendors at a time. You're going to confirm what time they're arriving and what they're bringing, what's included in the contracts, so that you don't have these major surprises on the wedding day, right? And so it's really, really important that you're responsible for the timeline, that you're letting them know. I will let the vendors know what time they can arrive and what time they can break down. I'll confirm that what's in your contract is what they're actually bringing. Or if your guest count changes, I'll make sure to do that. But so that you are that liaison and you do have that power on the event day to make decisions on behalf of your client. So you really want to make sure that they understand which of those two services you're actually providing. So that would be the first thing that I would say, is that make sure that you're calling it what it is and that you're letting your clients know what you'll be responsible for. The other thing I would say is that in our contract, it says that our production schedule, we call it a wedding resume, but a lot of people call it a production schedule. That production schedule will be the final living document, and that if something is not in there, it won't happen. Like, it must be in the final production schedule that they will sign off on a week before their wedding. So we create a production schedule. It is usually anywhere between 8 and 20 pages, depending on the scope of the wedding. But it literally details out every single thing that will happen for every event that we are doing, it, what the hotel is providing or the venue, what every single vendor is providing, what time they're arriving, what time they're leaving, where the bride's going to be. It also details out what the bride or groom or couple is going to bring to us to put out. So Paige kind of mentioned this, but like things that get damaged on the wedding day or don't get returned on the wedding day, this is your responsibility, planners. Like, this is your responsibility. And I can tell you, early in my career, I got burned by not having clients sign off on our production schedule. And so they would tell us things like, oh, but I brought you 4 picture frames, but only 2 were returned. And I'm like, no, you brought us 2. And they're like, no. So then it's this he said, she said. And so in our production schedule, it lists out ceremony items you're bringing, cocktail items you're bringing, dinner reception items you're bringing. And it tells what they're bringing to us. And at the rehearsal, we check it all in. And we're very cautious with that because we've been burned by it. So we make sure that they understand these are the things that are going to get returned to you at the end of the night. And if you bring us extra things, we're going to hand write it into the production schedule and have you initial it, because we want to make sure that what you get back at the end of the night is what you gave us and that we all agree to that. So I think that that's something that's really important, is that we have them sign that production schedule. And then, you know, there's always going to be things here and there that kind of come up on the wedding day. And that the hope is that you have such a great relationship with your clients that you know, those are little exceptions to the rule instead of the rule. But your production schedule should really be something that you have them review and sign prior to their wedding.
So important. Brandee, I'm really glad that you mentioned these few last things on this episode, because for, you know, I would say, what did you call it? Event coordination, where it's not like day of
coordination,
services.
or event management.
Event management.
Yeah, event management.
So
yeah.
I love that. I love that term. So you guys use that if you're a planner, because it makes way more sense. It's not like this unicorn that doesn't really exist for day of services. Because I agree with you. I don't think any planner can just like show up and be told what to do and adequately perform the way they need to perform. Like, they have to talk to their clients beforehand, and usually all vendors beforehand. So event management, love that, instead of full service planning. But with event management, if you're going to do that type of wedding planning, make sure you have a scope of services clause. Anything that's beyond the scope of services, additional fees, because you're going to get asked to do like 80 more things than you signed up for. And then, as Brandee said, like, have that production schedule and notice and like signing and how that needs to go down in your contract as well. Because you're not going to actually have the production schedule for them to sign, but you need to include a clause regarding what that looks like, when they should expect it, when you require signatures back on it, and anything, regarding controversies surrounding the production schedule and how you guys would resolve those type of disputes. Those are all really good things to have in your planning contract as well. Brandee, I feel like you and I could talk for hours about everything we know about the wedding industry and planning industry. It's tantalizing and so interesting to me. But let's wrap up here. What are a few last remaining pieces of advice that you have for planners and how they can really ensure their business is protected with all of the expertise and experience that you have?
Yeah. The thing that I would say right now, especially in the age that we're living with pricing going all over the place, I think this is kind of the most pressing thing happening with our industry right now is be in communication with your vendors. Know what's going on with them. Know what they're dealing with. Understand their price increases, because the biggest benefit to using a planner, whether you're event management or full service, like no matter what service they have, they're looking to you for your advice and your expertise. That's why they're hiring you. So you need to have your pulse on your industry. What is happening so that you can pre-contract be that really great negotiator for both sides. You can, advocate really well for your partners, but then you can also advocate really well for your clients to come to a really beneficial win-win mutual agreement. And it's just more important than ever to understand what your vendors are dealing with and what they're going through, because it's different for every vendor. So I would say just be in touch with your industry.
That's the perfect end here. Brandee, I know that you have lots of offerings for people if they want to learn more from you, or any of the mentorship and educational things that you have available for people to purchase. I also know you have a really awesome conference coming up. So lay it all out here. Where can people find you? What do you have coming down the pipeline that they can learn more from you about, and anything else that you want to leave people with here today?
Yes. Okay. So I'd love to invite you guys over to the Wedding Pro CEO podcast. There's an episode we released on May 26th, and it's called, Are You Actually Making a Profit? And I think that this would be really beneficial, especially with inflation and all the things going on, to help you just outline all of the costs that you have, because we all think we don't have overhead, but we do. So I'd invite you to check that out. And then also come over and join us in the Wedding Pro CEO community on Facebook, free Facebook group where we dig into all of this. And then Paige mentioned our summit. It's coming up August 15th through 18th. And I would love to invite you here to Orlando, Florida to join us for that. So you can find all of that over in the Wedding Pro CEO podcast community on Facebook.
Perfect. And you guys know that I'm going to link all of this up in show notes as well. And you can go follow Brandee. I'm sure she's going to inform you all about these happenings that are going down for the rest of this year. So Brandee, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
Planners, I wanted to remind you before we end today's episode that the Legal Page has your business legally covered. As a wedding industry professional myself, I know exactly what needs to be in your client contracts, and especially with wedding coordinator contracts, I want you to be covered in any potential situation. Very similar to what Brandee and I were talking about on this episode, our full-length wedding planning template contract at thelegalpage.com includes a communication clause that will ensure that you're protected regarding, what your office hours are, when your clients need to contact you back, and what would happen in the event of a client ghosting you. That automatic, breach of contract, termination, unilaterally type of situation. This type of clause has recently been revised by me and my legal team, and we included it in our full-length wedding planning contract. So make sure that you go snag that at thelegalpage.com/wedding planning. And of course, thanks again to Brandee for being here on this episode. And I will talk to you all in the next episode next week. Thank you so much for listening to the Legal Page podcast. I am beyond grateful for you, which is why I want to give you a coffee or your favorite bevy on me. If you leave a 5-star rating and review for the Legal Page podcast on iTunes, screenshot the review and send it to me on Instagram at The Legal Page. That's The Legal PAIGE. I will send you a Starbucks gift card from me. Just make sure to include your email in the DM. So again, send a screenshot of the review to me on Instagram at The Legal Page, include your email address, and I will send you some Starbucks, because what better gift than caffeine for every business owner? Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Legal Paige podcast. See, I told you being legally legit isn't so scary. Be sure to visit thelegalpage.com for all show notes. And it would be super awesome if you could head over to iTunes and leave a review. Last but not least, don't forget to join my free Facebook group for unlimited legal and biz Q&A. Chat soon, Legal Pagers.